Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Apostle Savannah Sai, the Manager of Public Programs here at the National Building Museum. The museum was established by an act of Congress in 1980. We are the nation's museum for the built environment, inspiring curiosity about the world we design and build. Through exhibitions, educational programs, and special events, we welcome visitors of all ages to experience stories about the built world and its power to shape our lives, our communities, and our future. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our program, Accessory Dwelling Units, Supporting a Changing Demographic. We are thrilled to have a room full of people who are interested in learning more about how ADUs can address housing needs, especially for multi-generational families and aging populations. Whether you're here as a homeowner, housing advocate, or someone curious about ADU possibilities, today's session is packed with insights and practical advice to guide you. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for making this program possible. Tonight's sponsors are AARP and Rooted Communities. I'd also like to thank all of our contributing partners and speakers for helping us organize this important program. This seminar is part of the National Building Museum's Future Cities Initiative, a multi-year platform where through exhibitions, programs, convenings, and public engagement, we will explore how to increase the livability of neighborhoods and the vibrancy of our communities. We have an incredible panel of experts ready to share their knowledge on topics such as ADU design, local zoning, and financing options. There will be 2 Q&A sessions. Please use the index cards located on the 2 high-top tables on either side of you to write your questions, and a staff member will collect those from you. Following the panel discussion, we will have breakout sessions where you can dive deeper into specific areas of interest, ask questions, and engage directly with our speakers. This is a great opportunity to personalize your learning experience, so I encourage you to stay and participate. So let's dive in and make the most of this evening. We begin our first presentation and conversation with Cheryl Court and Rodney Harrell. Cheryl Court is Policy Director for the Coalition for Smarter Growth, CSG, the leading nonprofit advocacy organization addressing where and how the Washington, D.C. region grows. She works with a broad range of activists, practitioners, and officials to promote inclusive, walkable, bike-friendly, transit-oriented communities focused on D.C. and Prince George's County, Maryland. Following CSG's campaign to legalize accessory apartments in D.C., she led efforts to educate homeowners and promote ADU construction across the city. Rodney Harrell is the Vice President of Family, Home, and Community at AARP, leading the AARP Public Policy Institute's team of experts related to family caregiving and livable communities. He is also an esteemed trustee of the National Building Museum. His research focuses on housing preferences, neighborhood choice, and community livability. I'd like to welcome Cheryl and Rodney to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Apostle, for that great introduction. I'm excited to be here today to talk with you about something that I'm a big fan of. I'm, as you heard, AARP's Vice President of Family, Home, and Community, and I've been working there for years on trying to figure out ways that we can create housing solutions and community solutions for people of all ages. And one of the things that's really excited me over the past few years is the growth in accessory dwelling units. And for those that are new to this, you'll learn what those are, and you'll learn a lot about how they can help your lives into the future today. But unfortunately, I have to start with a little bit of a disappointing story. You can't build accessory dwelling units everywhere. My mother, in fact, wanted to build one on her property. One of my father's friends, my late father's friends, was running on hard times. And so he didn't have a place to stay. He had been a government employee for years. He decided to go out on his own to start a tourism business right during COVID. And then he had some health problems. All of a sudden he couldn't afford his place and didn't have any choices. Well, we wanted to think about building an apartment in the backyard. Maybe he could stay there. My father had passed, so he could give my mother some company and be a friend there. But we happen to live in one of the counties of the region, Prince George's County, where it's very difficult. nearly impossible to build an accessory dwelling unit, and so that option wasn't there. So he had to deal without housing options for another year or so while we actually had to find something for him. So what I love about accessory dwelling units is providing more options for people like my father's friend Clarence and others who might need to have a place to be. So very quickly, let me talk about housing at AARP. You'll see on the left-hand side here, AARP's founder, Ethel Percy Andrus, who found one of her friends living in a chicken coop in the early 40s. And she was a retired teacher. The friend was a retired teacher who lost her land in a bad deal and couldn't afford a place to live. So that really started AARP's path on how to help financial security, housing, and other issues. In the middle here in 1961, you'll see a little bit of a house called the House of Freedom, where President Eisenhower got to see a model house that had what we now call universal design or inclusive design features, things like zero-step entrances and wide doorways, switches at reachable heights, the kinds of things we need to have housing for people of all ages. And we've been working from that to this new generation of our work in the present, where 2015, I see Shannon Guzman here in the crowd. We started AARP's Future of Housing Initiative to really work on these housing issues in a much more concentrated way. So very excited to be part of this discussion and part of trying to create housing solutions. And you heard joining me is Cheryl Court, who I will ask to say a little bit about what the Coalition for Smarter Growth is.
Thanks, Robbie. All right, that was a less smooth transition than we had planned. I'm with a local organization called Coalition for Smarter Growth. We work in the DC region. I specifically work in DC and Prince George's, but that was bad for me not to say. We actually work in the entire region. My colleagues are traversing Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, and I have another colleague dedicated in Montgomery County, and we've been working on actually accessory dwellings for a long time, but we are a regional organization that's been around for more than 20 years, advocating for walkable, bikeable, inclusive, transit-oriented communities as the most sustainable and equitable way for the DC region to grow and provide opportunities for all. So I'll just leave it at that, and we'll get more into the specifics.
Great. Maybe a little later you can talk to us about what Coalition for Smarter Growth is doing in this space. But before we get back to Cheryl, I want to talk a little bit about what AARP's background is in housing, and really not AARP so much, but really what we need in housing in America. And the first reality for us, and the reality for all of us, is that the way people are aging is changing. By 2034, people over 65 will outnumber those under 18 for the first time in U.S. history. And what that means is a fundamental shift is happening for us. For hundreds of years in this country, we built communities with one assumption in mind, and that's that we're not going to have that many older adults. So the shortcut was many people didn't feel they had to build for older adults or around the needs of older adults. And that's changing. We've got 10,000 people turning 65 every day. And so the way we think about our housing, our communities, our transportation systems, really many of the things has to change with that, because it's not the case that we just have a few older adults in each community or neighborhood or town. We're going to have more and more as we grow. Now, we're going to have more older adults than younger folks soon, but nearly 80% of those people age 50 and older, and nearly 90% of those 65 and older want to stay in their homes and communities as long as possible. So we've got a growing number of older adults, and the vast majority of them want to stay where they are, build connections to their communities, to their favorite places to go, to the favorite people that they have nearby. For many reasons, people want to stay where they are, and so that's a very important motivation for them. At the same time, though, according to the Harvard Joint Center, less than 1% of homes have 5 features, things like zero-step entrances and wide doorways, bathrooms on the first floor, space to navigate in their homes. Less than 1% of homes in this country have those features. And 10 million households age 65 and older are housing cost burden. So we're aging as a society. We have people that want to stay where they are if they can, but their homes don't meet their needs and they can't afford them. Lots of challenges that are here. Additionally, 64 million of us live in multi-generational households. We're growing more diverse as a country. Asian and Hispanic households especially are more likely to live in multicultural households. And then many of us are rethinking our housing options, especially after COVID. So we're seeing a lot more people in different housing arrangements now. 1 in 5 of us is a family caregiver. We're taking care of someone. Like my mother was taking care of my father, like I help her today. 40% of those care for someone living in their home, and 38% care for someone living on their own. And COVID was a horrible tragedy for this country. We lost over 166,000 people in nursing homes, almost 200,000 if you count those who worked in those nursing homes. And that's a tragedy in and of itself. But one of the silver linings of that was that there's 166,000 families that started to think newly about their housing options after that. So since COVID, we've seen a lot more people thinking about, well, what kind of housing option could I have to prevent my mother or father or grandmother from staying in a nursing home? Maybe I should be able to build an addition to my house or a garage apartment that might work for them. So, amongst other things, it helped us to rethink our housing situations, as many of us faced the worst case housing scenario or even just a little bit of social isolation. Lots of people were thinking about that. And so, generally, I want to talk about the solution that ARP has to this many complex things that I'm talking about. And the bottom line is that we advocate for livable, age-friendly communities. The idea is that these are communities that provide options for folks. You need to be able to meet your needs regardless of your age, your income, your background, your race, other factors. The idea is creating communities for people of all ages. And so, can we create communities where people can get to the things that they need nearby? Can we create communities that people can afford? Can we create communities that have housing options that have what they need? That is and should be our goal. So let me talk a little bit about age-friendly housing options and the 3 pillars that we have there. Age-friendly housing basically is 3 things. 1, the options that I mentioned. We need housing options to meet all those needs I talked about earlier. They need to be affordable, they need to have those features that people need, and they need to be high-quality housing that people can have where they need them. Housing has to be affordable. We need a range of different housing types to meet our needs. The livability index we created measures every neighborhood in the country, and about 8 out of 10 neighborhoods only have single-family housing in this country. So if you only have one option, how is that supposed to meet everybody's needs? And I mentioned our founder and her House of Freedom with all of those universal or inclusive design features. We need to build housing that accommodates people at every ability level. Does it have the kinds of things that allow you to navigate, whether you have a little bit of trouble walking, or maybe you're not seeing as well as you used to, and the like. So we can do this by increasing our housing options. There are many housing options here on this slide that we used to build in this country that we don't any longer in many places. This is sometimes called missing middle housing, the idea that we might want to build a townhouse or a side-by-side duplex or a stacked duplex. Some of these options in neighborhoods might give us more of what we want. However, this requires zoning and other things to be in place, and sometimes might not be a fit for every neighborhood, and that's okay. At the same time, we've got other options like co-housing, which are building housing in a way that has joint facilities, a joint kitchen or living room where people can come together in a community. Multi-generational housing I've mentioned. Housing with supportive services. There's lots of places that are working on bringing in service coordinators and others that can bring in the things that people need within their housing. So maybe you need a little extra help, but by bringing in some of these supportive services, you can stay in that home longer. And with those 80% of neighborhoods that only have single-family housing, maybe some of those people would be able to find something that improved their lives if they were home sharing. So even in our existing homes and neighborhoods, we can create the kind of housing that we need, and with the companionship and other things that folks need as well. And I've mentioned a couple times universal and inclusive design. Here you see this happy couple here with a zero-step entrance in their home, a home that can be navigated well, a shower that could be accessed. But again, if we don't create the kinds of options we need in our housing that meet all of our needs, we're going to limit our folks. And the worst case scenario is that I see so many people that are adapting to their homes instead of the home adapting to their needs. The home should be able to meet you as things happen, And the very worst case scenario is that many of us might have a spouse pass, have a fall, have something shift in our lives, and our home no longer works for us. So the biggest piece of all of this is the idea that we need to think ahead for the future, and we need to think about our needs as they come and what we can do to create the homes that we need. So that's the things within the home. But Cheryl, if you could, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the kinds of policies that we can have to have housing in places that people need them.
So we are working in the DC region, and we're making sure we're advocating. We work with people like you and local community groups and advocates to make sure that we're building all sorts of housing in neighborhoods that are walkable or could be more walkable. We especially want to build more housing around transit and give people a lot of good options. And we know that there's a lot of people who would like to live in more walkable neighborhoods close to transit, and so it's kind of a wrestling match to make sure that happens. And so we've worked on all sorts of different at all different levels, from the planning process to the development review process, and then also kind of key policies like accessory apartments is just one component of on an overall strategy to make sure that we're providing the kinds of housing options people would like to see, and really give them the opportunity to live more sustainably with a smaller carbon footprint, because they can take more of their trips by walking, or bicycling, or riding transit. And so this is just an example of the kinds of activities that we do. We're advocates. We're working with people throughout the region and their communities to advocate for missing middle housing and for more different kinds of housing focused around transit and also all of that goes with that to create those walkable, bikeable places with the kind of street designs and fixing our arterials and really creating places that not only do we have a metro station, but it's actually easy and safe to walk to it.
And one thing that I really love about what CSG does, it works across the region to make sure that we have those things in all parts of our community. So that's a little bit of background on the housing needs we have as we're aging, on the kinds of community options that make us have livable, age-friendly communities. But the main thing we're here to talk about today are accessory dwelling units. So you've heard that phrase earlier, you've heard accessory apartments, accessory dwelling units. What are these things? So the definition is a separate living space, whether it's attached, like a garage apartment, attached like an addition to a home, or detached like a garage apartment, on a lot with an existing home that can accommodate a variety of housing needs. So on the next slide, I'll just show you a little bit about some examples of what this looks like. You'll see at the top there a detached ADU. That might be something that in a place of garage or something similar. You'll see some actual attached units above a garage or connected to a garage there as well. On the right-hand side, you'll see what are called attached ADUs, whether it's an attic conversion or a garage that's attached to the home, basement conversion, or English basements in some of our neighborhoods could be the same. But the idea, again, is that we've got all of these neighborhoods with these single-family homes that I mentioned, and now all of these are varieties of ways that we can bring an additional housing unit on that property, whether someone might need it for a range of reasons. They may be someone who wants to age in their home and maybe they have too many stairs, so they can build an ADU with fewer stairs. Maybe there's somebody who needs a caregiver that perhaps can stay on their property and help them out as they're staying there. I remember a great conversation we had with a gentleman who was building an ADU because he really wanted to be part of the solution and create more affordable housing in his neighborhood. So building more entry-level housing is one of the goals you can have. Or frankly, you could be somebody who's struggling economically. You have a house, your house rich and cash poor. Well, building an ADU might help you with some income generation. You might be able to create a rental property. And again, affordable housing options in the community. So I like to call this the Swiss Army knife of housing policy, that by adding the flexibility to build these units in our properties, we can address a lot of different housing problems all at one time. But there are barriers to developing ADUs. maybe I painted this magical vision of this Swiss Army knife housing option that would just make everybody's life better. But at the beginning, I talked about the fact that my mother couldn't do that in Prince George's County. Now, why not? Because it's not allowed there by right. Meaning she doesn't have the right to build one on her property just because she owns it. So whether it's allowed in policy, some places just purely illegal to build an accessory dwelling unit. There's regulatory barriers like the one I mentioned that perhaps you just can't do it without a special exception process and the like. You might have to go for your planning board and have a whole lot of procedural barriers that it takes to build one of these things. And one of the biggest challenges we have generally is a financial barrier, that it can be hard to get financing for one of these units built. And so many people who are able to build these are able to build them out of their savings. If you don't have that kind of cash on hand, you might have trouble getting a mortgage for one or some other financial solutions. So the trick is to get people these benefits that we have and try to take down some of these barriers. So Cheryl, since I'm talking about barriers, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the barriers that we have locally here?
All the barriers that Rodney talked about, we certainly can talk about in each of our jurisdictions, and sort of put up a list of sort of where we've started and where we are. We've made a lot of progress in the DC region. This is a map of the single-family zones in the District of Columbia over there. And so now all of those areas actually allow one accessory apartment as a matter of right due to reforms in the zoning code. And so in terms of like the formula, it's we need to first look at the zoning rules to ensure that they do allow for one or more accessory units in residential zones as a matter of right, as opposed to a special, potentially hard, difficult process. And then we need to look at what kinds of restrictions are involved. We would recommend, not require, or the kind of restrictions that are going to trip you up in terms of being able to build an accessory unit are additional parking requirement for the accessory unit, an owner occupancy requirement, which obviously is very common, including DC. And other kinds of overly restrictive size or tenant requirements like the size of the building, or only seniors can live there, or only domestic workers can live there. DC's old zoning code actually only allowed for domestic workers to live in an accessory unit in a residential zone. And then sort of looking at the path to reform, we've seen it done in different ways in different jurisdictions in the region. DC did a whole-scale revamp of its 1958 zoning code, and at that time it actually went through and sort of deregulated it and came up with more reasonable rules for accessory apartments, whereas Montgomery County, I think all at Arlington, decided to do it just specifically as a whole process of its own, just to examine how they wanted to do accessory dwelling units. And then after you've reformed your zoning code and it's now okay, you can now go ahead and build this as a part of your property, then we actually need to look at program implementation, and we need to retrain staff so that they understand government staff, so they know what they're reviewing and what rules they're going to be enforcing. And then we need to educate people, homeowners who would be interested in doing this, and then just all the support that goes along with that. And so that's what we've done over the last several years.
Yeah, and those onerous restrictions, we call those poison pills sometimes because they just really limit the things that people can build. Why don't you talk a little bit about cost and design?
Right, so I have to caveat to say that the typical cost of $150,000 is a pre-COVID cost. So we'll have to ask, we have experts here who can update us on what they think would be a typical cost. But, when I started working on this, and maybe you thought about this too, you thought maybe we could build that accessory unit for $50,000. Very unlikely. So basically, we're definitely north of $100,000 in terms of a new living unit. Whoops. And actually, I got this from Angel, who's going to speak later on. In terms of the cost of the unit from what likely are to be your least costly to most costly is a renovated garage. A garage conversion could be the cheapest option, but it always depends on the condition of the property. A renovated basement is probably the most common form in DC, but that also depends on ceiling height and other things. A freestanding building is going to be more expensive, and then an excavated basement where you're having to dig down is probably going to be most expensive. And as Ileana has talked about, he's going to speak later, it also could be a situation where you're pulling out buckets of dirt by hand. That's definitely on the expensive side of excavation. So those are sort of some of the kind of scenarios for different types of building. Give me the next slide. And then I just wanted to, Rodney mentioned financing, and you know, it's financing it's typical doing an accessory unit is conventionally like going and doing a renovation loan, going to the bank and getting a renovation. And so these are, you know, some of the kind of framework around when you go and talk to a banker, what kinds of things you're going to have to think about in terms of credit history, and how much equity you have in your home in order to do, say, like a home equity loan. And beyond that, friends and family is actually a fairly typical way for people to finance something. And I will note that when you say, well, if you think you would be eligible for a typical mortgage product, the banker who's going to give you this kind of loan is not like a big national bank. It's going to be like a little local bank. And so the way to figure out who that is that if you walk around your neighborhood and you see a sign that says, this renovation is done by little bank, that's the kind of bank that does these types of projects. And so the big nationals are not going to do these kinds of projects. It's the local banks that do.
Yeah, it's fair to say you've got to be a little bit flexible, and you've got to figure out how to make this work for you, I think, on the finance side. So we talked about a little bit of the barriers, but let's talk about some of the resources we have to help us think about where we might live and how that might work for us. Very quickly, I mentioned that livability index earlier. So the ARP created this index to measure every neighborhood in the country, so you can use this index to look up a neighborhood using 50 different national sources of data across 61 indicators and get a score for your neighborhood. This will tell you things like, is this neighborhood near parks or grocery stores, libraries, things I want? Are there housing options in this neighborhood? What are the traffic fatalities in this neighborhood? How's the air quality? Access to health care? Are people socially engaged? And are there economic opportunity sources in this neighborhood? And you'll see it's on a scale of 1 to 100. DC gets a 57 overall, but each neighborhood has a different score. And this might help you to think about, well, what kind of neighborhood am I in, and is it the kind of one that will work for me into the future? If you do decide that you want to be in a certain neighborhood and you want to build an ADU, I'd like to introduce you to a lot of our ARP ADU resources. So if you need to know more about any of these things, you go to arp.org/ADU. We've got an ABCs guide that really takes you through this. If Cheryl and I talk way too fast for you to try to meet our time limit. You can see ARP's Model Act that gets rid of some of those poison pills and regulations that we talked about. If you're a local legislator or state legislator and want to figure out how we can do this at that level. We've got brochures and a design guide that can help you as a homeowner think about, well, what should this actually look like? What can I build? What can I do? There's a really great resource we have. And as well as a policy solutions document that talks about how different places in the country have dealt with some of these challenges and put them into place, as we're trying to make sure that everyone has the ability to do this. So I think the one thing I want you all to take away from me at least is go to arp.org/ADU if you want more. Also, the ARP Home Fit Guide. And for any home, whether you're building an ADU or whether you're trying to stay in your own home, I mentioned all of those issues that a home might have, the kind of things you might need as we're aging. Well, every home can become a home fit home. The idea we can make changes in our home to make it work better for us. From things as simple as, removing clutter and trip hazards around the house, to the actual things we might do in a remodel or in a building of a bathroom or kitchen or dining area. We have a home fit guide that helps you with that as well. So lots of solutions for policymakers, but also for you as individuals. And Cheryl, CSG has some things too, don't they?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of things. The first one is actually a a DC homeowners manual that we did on ADUs that's specific to DC that we did with the United Planning Organization, and you can get that on our website at smartergrowth.net. And I recommend that if you're thinking about doing this in DC, it's a great resource. It's also a good resource even if you don't live in DC, but you should definitely look at the specifics of your jurisdiction. And there are some other resources here, and we're happy to share these with you. And then the last one actually is a DC ADU Google group. It's a little bit quiet like right now, but it's actually great. When people come to me and ask me a question, I was like, put that on the Google group and somebody will answer your question. So if you are thinking about it, you got a question, it's a great place to share information. And we've learned and shared information actually, learned important sort of regulatory barriers, and we then went and knocked on the door of DC and said, why are you doing it this way? You said you were going to do such and such. So it's a great way for us to share resources and break down barriers.
Yeah. And speaking of questions, if you've got one, you can go ahead and use one of these tables on either side, and Cheryl and I will be able to answer them. But I want to wrap up by saying, this part of the program anyway, by saying that there's a couple of things I hope that you take away. One is that we need to think about our housing from today into the future. Two is that accessory dwelling units, depending on where you are in this region, might be an option for you. And if you do, you should think about all of those things that we discussed. But three is that whether you're a homeowner or a policymaker, you can help the policy process to make it easier to build these things. You can help address some of those policy solutions that we talked about and try to make it better and easier for other people to have the kinds of housing options they need. We have a thing at ARP, we talk about people being everyday innovators in aging. I think all of us are innovators, and that we can help our neighborhoods, our counties, and maybe one day even Prince George's County become innovators in housing and have the options that folks need.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. One of the questions that I had dealt with financing. Are you aware of any grants for people who need to make significant modifications to their home? And if so, where would someone look for something like that?
And where do you live? Prince George's. Oh, my favorite county. So that's a great question, and some of, I think we've got some, by the way, I'm looking forward to some of the side conversations we have with some of the folks from the jurisdictions later that can handle that. And unfortunately, I don't know that there's a program that does exactly what you need. We've got some grant programs that are coming from different federal agencies that sometimes come through the counties. There's one that comes through HHS, but I have to double check and see if we've got that in Prince George's County. But the local housing department is the way to check and find some of these things, the programs where they are. But oftentimes there are restrictions on income and sometimes age on those things too. So it can be a little tricky of a web to get the funding for remodeling and refinancing on that space. Yes, ma'am.
So one is interested in building an ADU in Bethesda in the residential area for like a senior parent. Where does one start, especially in reference to zoning requirements?
Well, fortunately for all of us, we have a Montgomery County zoning expert with us, Lisa, if you could wave. Oh, there she is. She's way, way in the back. And so for the breakout groups, definitely go ask her that question. And the zoning becomes very specific. The process in zoning, it's all a little bit nuanced, different in each jurisdiction. So you actually really need to know what is it for your jurisdiction. And so, fortunately, I think we actually have most jurisdictions that permit ADUs here today.
And so starting with your local urban planners and zoning folks is the way to go, and I'm really excited that we have those folks here to help folks out and help think this through. So the first step is being here. So glad that you're here, could learn about it, and then talk to some of those folks today, and then they can give you some good guidance, as Cheryl mentioned. So that's wonderful.
Where can you build 2 ADUs?
Where can you build 2 ADUs?
I thought I saw it on your
Well, in Vancouver, British Columbia, I think you know the
Yeah. And
Cincinnati, okay.
Cincinnati,
Nowhere nearby.
San Diego does that as well, but not in this region, unfortunately.
So I'm curious, with all the advancements and innovation with prefabricated housing, with the smaller design models, more advanced materials and everything, and it actually allows for quicker assembly of that house than construction. What are you doing in that space?
Do you want to take this first?
Alternatives?
Well, so I'm really excited about that space. That the two spaces, modular construction and a prefabricated construction. The idea that we can build things more efficiently in a factory circumstance are great. We did some work with HUD, and last year on the National Mall, we had some model homes that were all spread out there. Some of the manufactured homes that could be built and built to the national code, the HUD code that could be placed. And modular housing allows us to build, whether it's an addition or whether it's something else, and we can build some of these panels and even entire units in factories. Now, there are challenges, though, with what's allowable where you live. Back to some of Cheryl's slides on some of those barriers. So I think it's an area of potential. There's that barrier. And the other barrier, I'd say, is one of people being ready to accept these options. I spoke at the National Association of Home Builders Conference in Las Vegas, the International Builders Show, a few months ago. And what struck me so much was how many of those folks, the building communities at large, is still doing things the same way over the last 100+ years. That power tools is a big change that they've accepted, but we're still building wood frame houses on site, and we're building things alike. So things don't move as quickly as maybe they could in that space, and those are some of the reasons why. But I don't know if you wanted to add to that, Cheryl.
Yeah, I mean, there is promise, but I went down the rabbit hole. It's not a panacea, and in fact, we couldn't find it saving money. There could actually be quality improvements, basically, from a more controlled environment for doing something. But basically, and if you pick up my DC ADU manual, we look at that. Basically, look at the cost, and it's very similar cost. And there's so many uncertainties because the unit there's just site preparation costs are always there, and there's just sort of a lot of it's if you think about Levittown, if you can just something out sort of just strip the land and just build a bunch of things prefabricated on top of it in a very uniform way. If you're sort of doing infill development in a city, it's not so simple. Basically, it's fitting into the context that it's in, and so we don't really see necessarily that there's necessarily a cost advantage, although there could be other advantages.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that long-term potential's there, but it's not right where it needs to be today. I know some cities are, nobody in this region that I know of, but some cities are experimenting with having pre-made designs that then become easier to build. And I'll say, by the way, I mentioned San Diego earlier, that a lot of the folks that are doing a lot of the advanced thinking on ADUs are out in California. That's the biggest market in the country, and it's growing. So if you're looking for inspiration and the like, we can look at areas that have been doing this for a while, and what might be working there, and we might see what might come here later on.
Yes. What type of political barriers are you guys experiencing in some of the ADUs?
It's a great
What
question.
jurisdiction do you live in?
Pretty sure.
Oh, okay, well.
I'm going to get a Washingtonian.
Well, we've managed to do a lot of reforms in Arlington, DC, Montgomery County, not as much in Fairfax County, and actually, I can't remember where we are in Alexandria. Prince George's has taken a little bit of a step back where some cities used to have ADU provisions, and then they repealed them as a part of a new zoning code. I know that the planning board in Prince George's is very eager to get back at that, but we're looking at a couple of years before we. And in fact, I was in conversations with elected officials when COVID hit, basically, where that was going to be the next move, was to go, oh, we were at the same meeting. It was like the last meeting I had before COVID. And so basically, we were ready to take that step, and then everything in the world changed. So you're a couple of years off, but we're going to get there. In fact, I'm looking at a plan around the West Hyattsville Metro Station right now that is airing October 1st, if anyone wants to do a shout out for it, where it says, and when we allow accessory dwelling units, we should allow them in this whole plan area.
But I'll answer your question slightly differently and say one word: fear. And so we work around the country and looking at places and working at the issue, and the fear of something different in our neighborhood, the fear of our streets being taken over by all the cars from ADU, the fears from those people, whoever those people are, moving in and making our neighborhood not as good. Many fears happen, and so the solution to that has been just incremental change. So we've been seeing folks take steps, and we talked about one county here who might take steps into the future. But the idea is sometimes when they're dealing with fear of neighbors, on what might happen if we allow this, is to go as far as you can and then expand from there. Because often what we see is, it's better for people. Having these options are better for everyone in the neighborhood. The homeowner who needs a renter or who needs a space to stay for the caregiver, they win. The person who needs a housing option who may have been priced out or zoned out and not been able to be in that neighborhood, they win. But people need to see that and be okay with that in some jurisdictions. So that fear happens a lot. And so one thing I've done with my approach nationally is to say, this isn't a one and done kind of thing. It's not one of those policies we just pass and we move on. It's one of those things, as Cheryl's pointing out, you might take years to get to where you need to be to really get over that fear piece. Do we have time for one more? Are we out of time?
Well, I'm from Baltimore. I was wondering, is anyone from Baltimore here that can talk about what's happening there in this space?
Yeah, I'm just happy to have a new jurisdiction. I think we're focused on the DC area with this particular conversation, but I know there's lots of conversation about the rest of the state of Maryland as well. But again, nothing statewide, and Maryland's allowing ADUs, and that's something else that has yet to happen, so that might happen in the Baltimore region later on.
Wait, one more quick question.
Just a comment, I built an ADU in Georgetown. I had the entire city opposed to me. I had all of the DC Council, Citizens Association of Georgetown and CAG, and the local ANC all in opposition. So it took me 18 years to get the permit. It took me, because of COVID, 4 years to build it. All of my neighbors come over and tell me how much they love it and how it's improved the neighborhood.
And that's the fear part we're talking about. That's right. Well, thank you for being a pioneer on building housing options in Georgetown, and maybe some people should talk to you about how you can persevere through all that. All right, well, with that, I want to thank you all for your great questions, tough crowd, and I appreciate that. But we've got some great folks, as Cheryl mentioned, who know even more than we do about what's going on at the local area. You'll hear from them later. But right now, I think I want to hand it over to Ileana Schindler to lead our conversation with some other folks who have built ADUs here and how ADUs can support a changing demographic. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Cheryl and Rodney, for that great discussion. And thank you, audience, for your great questions. I was going to mention this earlier, but I'll go ahead and say it now. We have 6 breakout sessions for you to choose from after the next panel presentation. So we have wall-to-wall construction to talk about the construction process. We have Ileana Schindler, who's going to speak about design. For zoning questions, we have Montgomery County Planning, we have DC Department of Buildings, City of Alexandria Office of Planning and Zoning, and Arlington County Zoning Office. So save those specific zoning questions for the breakout session. Thanks. Oh, sorry. And to introduce our next speakers, Um, Ileana Schinder is an architect in Washington, D.C. Since opening her architecture studio in 2014, with creativity and innovation, she has designed additional dwelling units that create new spaces for clients and their families to thrive. As part of her efforts to educate the public on housing issues, Ileana has also written in blogs and held sessions to inspire and promote innovative models of home. Ileana is the author of Housing for Humans, a book to imagine, create, and design a new housing model in America. Ileana was born and raised in Argentina, and she lives in Washington, D.C. with her family and her dog, Colette. We also have DC ADU homeowners Mimi and Joe Odello, who are going to join her. Joe and Mimi Odello retired mid-2021 and moved from the West Coast to be near their daughter in Washington, D.C. Joe spent more than 30 years in banking. Mimi ended her career as an emergency manager. They are enjoying retirement, living on the family compound with their daughter Sarah, son-in-law Joshua, 2-year-old grandson Roque, and grandpup Nacho. Joe and Mimi have been married for more than 43 years. All right, thank you.
All right. I love this. It's my favorite museum. I brought my kids here many, many times, and now I brought my parents. Mami, papi, saluden. They're right there. Um, they don't speak a lot of English, but they're very loud and very fun. So go ahead and talk to them. So yes, I'm an architect, and I am the one who ends up dealing with the city, with zoning, with clients, with flashing details, with window and insulation details. But before that, this was the introduction. Thank you. I am from Argentina, and one characteristic of being Argentina is that you're very optimistic. And if you're going to go into ADUs, you have to be very optimistic. Every time you hear a barrier, you hear a rule that can't be done, you turn around and yes, we're going to do it anyways. And we're going to show everybody how we're going to do it. And if you don't believe me, here is a reminder. I am from Argentina. So here we go. So we talked about ADUs, talk about optimism. That poor fellow had to play soccer for 30-something years, room full of awards, and he couldn't win it until 2 years ago. Anyways, I'm not letting that go, by the way. I use it for every presentation. So Rodney earlier and Cheryl, they already described what an ADU is, and this is a clarification I want to give you. The main difference between an ADU and a duplex is that it's 2 dwellings in one lot. That sounds revolutionary, but that means that you have one tax entity. One person, one owner, one family owns both houses and the lot. So you can't sell one, you can rent one, but you can't put a lien on it. It's one entity. It's very important to understand when it comes to financial decisions because the mortgage can't come and take it. You can't take a mortgage separately from the main house because entity-wise it's one property where you have 2 families. In most zoning codes in the United States, with an oddity of the United States, it is not allowed to have 2 dwellings in one property. That's a very American thing. It's a long story where it comes from. Like I said, I wrote a book, I explained it a little bit there, but it's a long history of why you can't do 2. ADUs is trying to compensate for that. We talk about, Rodney explained it way better than I can. I'm like, he's like the best presenter I've ever seen in a long time. So, there's a thing I want to see. I learned to put QR codes of the presentations in my own presentations. I feel like I broke the technological barrier. Don't worry about taking notes or taking pictures. If you scan that QR code, you can go online and download the whole presentation. So you don't have to take individual pictures. I can't do it myself for some reason, but I'm sure all of you can do it. If not, email me, I'll send it to you. So anyway, Rodney explained already how the population of the US is changing, why ADUs are becoming more popular. They're multi-generational housing, monoparental families that need closer and better support. We have non-related adults living together, friends, cousins, siblings, and then we have aging adults. We have adults with special needs, people that decide not to live isolated from their support network. ADUs serve all that population. And who are these people? We're talking about millennials. How many of them live with family not of their own? What are the financial reasons why people live in intergenerational housing? All this data is available. There's a ton that we can see through the census. If you get really into that one day, it's great information. AARP has amazing housing resources. I got their printed packet. I'm like reading, it's like super excited. You can download it here, or you can ask Rodney, or yeah, it's very easy to find. Let's get to the meat of this. You'll hear a lot about zoning code, building code, and it's like, it seems like, oh my God, what is this? Imagine this is two giant books that regulate how houses work and what is allowed and what is not allowed. But to understand zoning versus building, it's very easy to understand. Zoning rules regulate what happens from the building envelope, that is the walls, the roof, and the floor, to the outside. Neighbors, street, fences. Imagine the house is a solid mass, and what happens to the outside, that's the zoning code. That's extremely local. It's a neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, county by county, right? That's why if you're in Baltimore, or if you're from PG County or Montgomery, the rules are completely different. And if you're one street on Montgomery County and you're another, the rules are different, right? However, the building code is universal. It's the same book that regulates what happens from the building envelope to the inside. Stairs, railing, the distance of the stove to the hood is in that book. How the outlet in the bathroom needs to be connected to the panel, that's in that book. That's universal. You go to Montana, they follow the International Building Code. In DC, we do as well. Jurisdictions, they all like get picky and say, oh, this subsection, I don't like it, I'll take it out. That's a problem for the architect to solve, but it's the same book. So we have zoning and building. Building's universal, zoning is not. So depending on what you live, you may be allowed to do ADU, but the details of that ADU is universal. It's a house, big or small. And I found this graphic and I thought it was pretty funny. When you're playing with Legos and you're creating a city, that's a zoning map. When you play with Barbies, that's a building code issue, right? Very easy. If you have a question, it's like, what would I play with if I were to understand it? Grab a toy, and that explains it. I thought it was like a great idea when I saw this. I felt I had like the best idea all year. Now, each zoning expert that's here, depending on where you are, will tell you, well, you can do it, but you gotta watch for these, for that, for the other elements. What I'm gonna explain you now are the basic elements that you need to have an ADU from a building perspective. If you have a basement, if you have a garage, it doesn't mean that you can't if you don't have these conditions. It means that when you go to your department of buildings and you show them what you want to do, you have to comply with this, right? Obviously, some things will be cheaper to do, more difficult, but you have to comply. First thing, because we're in DC and I've done tons of basement apartments, head clearance. If you're creating an ADU, it needs to be 7 feet. From the floor surface to the bottom of the joist. Don't worry if you have beams and ducts, whatever, that doesn't matter. The majority of the living spaces need to be 7 feet. This is different if your basement is part of your house. Don't worry about all this. If it's part of your house, it's not an ADU. It's just a portion of your house. It can be significantly lower. The other one, egress and access. For an ADU, just like any regular house, again, these rules apply for normal houses. You need emergency egress from bedrooms, and you need emergency egress from whatever main place you live in. If it's a studio, a door and a window will do it. You don't need 2 doors. People say, oh my God, I need a door for egress. You need 1 door and some other mean of egress. That's a window. Done. Check, check. You comply with code. but like in general, it is like that. If you have a basement, your window's too small, we normally do a window well, they're very cheap, very easy to implement. The idea, and this is not in the book, but an inspector explained me this very quickly to picture if your window is big enough. Imagine a fireman fully equipped with a tank trying to get in and out. I don't know what dimension that is, but more or less it's the same. And it has to be low enough that you have to climb it without help. Don't do that at home, but just imagine if you, like nobody's watching, could you climb that window? That is the egress you need. And if not, just Google the dimension. I do that all the time, so I can never remember. Now we're getting into the more difficult thing, the mechanical system. Mechanical system is basically environmental control, heating and cooling, simple. If this gets tricky when it's a basement that you're renovating, but it needs its own environmental control, its own thermostat, its own heating, its own cooling. Remember, this is a house that's supposed to function 100% separate from the main house. So whether it's a garage, a basement, an attached, whatever they may be, that environment must be fully independent from the main house. So you can't have the boiler in one house and the air blowing into other. They cannot mix. Separate people. Pretend you hate the other person living in the other dwelling. You can't mess up with a thermostat, right? And now we have to deal with that with our spouses, by the way. Same goes for electrical. ADUs need their own electrical sub-panel. Full control of your electrical system, but you don't need your own electrical meter. You can decide to meter it separately for expenses, or you can decide, well, proportionally, this ADU is 20% of the surface and increases the demand by 15%. So I will charge that person, whether you charge rent or you contribute financially, 15% of the cost of the total bill, the way you would do with a roommate. But code-wise, depending on your jurisdiction, again, and depending who serves your property, you may or may not need a second meter. But you will need a second panel, right? Because, hey, I need to fix something, I need to turn a switch off, I can't go into somebody else's house. Same rule for plumbing. You need to have a full function bathroom. Your water heating facility needs to be within your living. This gets tricky because the rule says you can't go into somebody's house. So you can put all this equipment in a shared vestibule. So you can go access, fix it, say, change the filter of the air conditioning without going to somebody else's house, right? So depending on your design, and that's where design kicks in, it's like what's the most efficient way to set up the infrastructure for these buildings. Nobody likes this slide. I don't like it either, but I gotta show it. Fire separation. And here where it's a building code question, but also depends on zoning. Not all jurisdictions demand that you create a fire separation between dwellings. Again, very tricky. Some demand, you gotta create the fire separation, but some demand fire suppression, some don't. How complicated that is, how would that affect? If you have a fire suppression question, ask me later, give me a cookie, and calm me down and we'll talk about it. You'll probably need to fire separate it, very easy. A continuous layer of drywall does it. You don't need to do anything white. Continuous layer of drywall, detail the light properly so fire and smoke doesn't travel through, easy, cheap. You don't go wild going anything crazy. So here's another one where it gets tricky. Area distribution. How small can an ADU be? Very small, but it's a house. A bus is not an ADU. A tent is not an ADU. If it's on wheels, it's not a building, it's a vehicle, or a boat, or whatever you call it. We're talking buildings here. From foundation to roof, it has to stay in one place. It has to have connection to infrastructure, to city public services, and it has to have minimal areas where people live for safety, for quality of life. So nobody actually checks this, but it's super basic like logic that certain things won't work if you make them too small, right? You can get very innovative and creative, fold down beds wherever you want, but don't get too crazy if you plan to live there full time. And then just sit in it. As you can see, the code requirements for minimums are super tight. If you, again, if you download this presentation, I have all the code section quoted there. If you have a particular question about a design you have, we can go later in the Q&A. Here's another one, equipment. Equipment is a code requirement, meaning you have to have cooking facilities, you have to have hygiene, like bathroom. But here's a fun thing. Some jurisdictions got in the business of telling people how big the equipment had to be. 30-inch stove, 30-inch whatever oven. That's not true. Anything that cooks and refrigerates does it. You can have an under-counter refrigerator, a 2-burner induction oven, and a 24-inch. That is a kitchen per the code, and a sink, because you need to be able to clean, refrigerate, and cook. There's no provision for microwaves, no provision for storage, none of that stuff. However, you want to design it in a way that makes sense and it works, not just because the code says that. The pictures you're seeing, it's all ADUs that I've designed and built, and my clients live. Like that particular one you see, that was in the Washington Post in the real estate section. It's blue. It's in 16th Street Heights off of Georgia Avenue. That kitchen you see, all the appliances are small. Like the dishwasher is 18 inches wide, the stove is 24, the fridge is 24. Only I think the washer and dryer are 30 inches wide, which was considered oversized. That building in particular used to be a garage workshop back in the 40s, I think. From the outside, it was like, it wasn't falling apart, it was in very bad shape, but it was structurally intact, so that's pretty cool. That's one of the first ones that like people started noticing and calling me about it. Here's another thing about the building code, and I know Rodney and Cheryl talked about prefab. I'm going to say this simply. Prefab construction is about 20 or 30% more than traditional construction. This is what I'm going to say. If you compare identical buildings built with 2x6s versus that building brought from Utah in a truck, and you rented a crane and you cut a bunch of cables in your alley that you had to pay Petco because you didn't know they were there. Hourly fee of crane operators like $400 an hour, and insurance and all that kind of stuff. At the end, I promise you, prefab will be 20 or 30% more had you created that identical building with 2x6s from Home Depot down the road. That's what I'm going to say about prefab. Love the guys, innovators, if somebody wants to pay for it. Anyways, here's energy code. Different jurisdictions apply the energy code differently. Again, beware when somebody sells you prefab that are not regional, because energy code controls insulation, controls windows and doors, how much fresh air you're supposed to bring in and out. By the way, I'm super excited because I saw the Audelas Roque grandkids like right here, and I saw him when he was like 2 months when I was working with them, so I'm like really excited right now. So energy code is something that architects know very well, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, because it has to do how much energy it takes to make that building livable. If somebody tells me that a prefab building they design in Montana is good for Florida or Rhode Island, I know that building's not good enough because it can't be the same. The insulation requirements are different, the openings are different, the mechanical system. So beware when people say, oh, look, I invented this building and we can sell it everywhere. You can sell it, but it's not work. Now, this is not something that is in any code book, but it has to do with design. How you design ADUs, you have to be very, very careful with how little space you have. In general, because these are secondary dwellings, these are not spaces where you have a ton of area to spare. So beware of things of using closets instead of wardrobes, or try to use appliances that are not oversized. avoid circulation, and what I call compact luxury. How much can you get of the little spaces you have? Every square inch you use is a square inch that's not going to get wasted. And here's something funny I always throw for those that want to download the presentation. You don't need a closet to make a little bedroom, period. Just don't. People freak out about it, particularly realtors. If there's any realtor in the house, just you can go like have a glass of water. You don't need a closet to make a little bedroom. It only needs to be 70 square feet, a window, smoke detector, a bunch of power located in the right way, done. That's a bedroom, right? Don't throw closets that ruin everything. Just use wardrobes from now on. So here it is, a little bit to conclude before I interview the Odellas. Very excited about that. So what we talk about is 4 additional dwelling units. They are houses. They're smaller, they're efficient, but they're just houses. So design and construction matters a lot, that they're done well. It doesn't need to be any lower quality. It doesn't need any worse than the large house in the main property. Building and zoning code are fundamental. The city where you're going to develop these matters a lot, and how this building is detailed to work depend on the code you're using. And then also is what type of quality of life you want to develop for groups that are underserved in the local market, right? There are a lot of underserved groups, economical, from other backgrounds, from culture that don't find housing that works for them. ADUs are starting to develop as that. And here's something I want to encourage when everybody's here is to lead by example. In many jurisdictions, you'll say, oh, you can't do that. And I was like, wait a minute, yes, I can. And start working with your local architect, with your neighbors, with people that will benefit from it. Go for it. Even if the rule today says no, you can get together with Cheryl Group, is amazing, with other people, Rodney's amazing group, that will give you tools to go to your official and say, this rule is wrong. This is how we can change it for the better. It will take you hopefully less than 18 years. It will take time, but I think it's worth to be part of the leading group that changed the rules, right? So this is not only for those that, oh, I want to do an ADU, I want to do this. It's like, well, I can't do it because the rules are wrong. What do I have to do to change it? Most of us here on the stage will support you. So we've done it in the past, and we can give examples, like whatever you need. And also, it's like the idea of sharing with others is amazing. So this is me. There's the QR code much bigger because maybe you can make it work. Do you want to do questions now, or do we do this? Okay. So we're gonna have a series of Q&A. Do you want to click through this? So I want to introduce you to the Audella family. This is Roque, by the way. He's super cute. So we might just not talk about this and just like play with him. I met them. When did we start? 2020? 21? 21. Sarah called me. It's their daughter. They live in Hillcrest, Southeast DC. Spectacular, large lot. You can see on the left the images of the existing house. Typical house from DC, a bungalow. That has a basement, upstairs 2 or 3 bedrooms, typical house. The lot was extremely deep, and then the Audella said, we want one of these things you do. And we plan to move there full time, so we don't want just like anything small or compact. We don't want to rent it. This is going to be our retirement home. So we created, and we're going to show pictures as we talk, we created a 2-story ADU that contains 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It's very generous, very modern, very open. They'll talk about it more because they're experiencing it every day. I designed it. We did have a challenge from the local zoning that they said, well, the footprint of this is too big. So I told them, it's like, I know it's too big, and I will tell you why. We can do a too big of an ADU, and it won't be a problem. So we went to the Board of Zoning in DC. We presented all the documents, it passed. It was like, okay, fine, we can do it. That's one of those things, it's like the book says no, but if you can show that by doing what you need to do or what you want to do, won't ruin anyone's lives, that's fine. I mean, people from the Board of Zoning are fairly reasonable. I said fairly. So what I'm gonna do is, we're gonna do a Q&A with the Odellas. Roque also is gonna speak, right? Yeah, he is.
He never stops.
And I think, and she will like click through the images and we'll see a little bit just to remember how big is this? I forgot square feet. How big is it?
About 1,100 square feet.
1,100. So it's 1,100 square feet. From a normal house sounds small, but again, we were able to fit 3 bedrooms, and we created in one plan, there is 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom in the ground floor. So we're gonna go to.
All right, so we're going to attract him. Nobody's going to pay attention to us. That's the first thing I'm going to say. And it's great because Rock in a way was like the background reason what I heard before. First, I met their dogs called Nacho, which was hilarious, but then Rocket came into the picture. But I want to ask the Aldella, one of the typical thought processes I go with all my clients is to analyze the budget, the time, and the program, right, that every project goes through. But I rarely get the chance to hear at the end how all those 3 criteria fit in the final project. So I want to ask you first to focus on time. How do you think that these ADU, this type of housing, fit in this time in your life? The decision process, before you started, when you moved, and what's going on now time-wise?
So going back even further to when our daughter left California, came to college in DC, and never came home. I always told her, make sure wherever you settle, the house next door is for sale because I'll be there. And you would think my husband of 43 plus years would know that I wasn't joking, and he thought I was joking. So when our daughter got married and our son-in-law and daughter bought a house, they bought it on this big piece of property, and it had, it actually came with ADU plans that were approved. And they bought in November of 20. And by this time, we're deep into COVID. We hadn't seen them for 18 months, and we said, no, we're tired of this. Not living this far away from them. There was no baby, there was a lot of hope. But we had the opportunity, the timing was right, we retired, we came east, we lived in their basement for 21 months, and discovered that we all got along really well, and it was working really well. And I think we started, actually the first time we talked to you was before we left California.
Yes.
We were doing Zoom calls. And so I would say very early 2021 was the beginning. And then by the time we moved here, we moved here in April of 21, saw preliminary plans, and went through lots of discussion and some changes, and just your attention to our details. What we wanted was fabulous, because I don't think we had that many changes. As the further we got into it, we were really pleased.
I would add that she gave us 3 different plans to choose from, and so we started, fitting things in there that we thought we liked and taking things out we didn't. And one of the things was I was going around our home in California, kind of measuring how small can we have the bedroom, how small can the living room be. Had some specifics because we didn't, in our mind, we just couldn't have tiny homes. Still wanted to have space because we'd always lived in bigger homes. So that was one of those transitions that we wanted to make, and still independent living without feeling like we're in a little box.
So you brought an important topic that comes right away after timing of an ADU, which has to do with scope and program, is what everyone assumes people need for space and how the architect starts the design process and what are the results of that building and how that assumed program actually works today. Do you expand how living full-time in an ADU actually creates that life that you have now, different from the suburban life you have in California? What are the pros and cons, and what are the things that surprised you of this building?
I think the total convenience of us having what we call the family compound. Um, our kids are across the grass, are now 2-year-olds. Grandson, you saw him up here, he's walking from their back door to ours and pounding on our door when he wants to come and hang out with us. We are also caregivers for him on a part-time basis. We don't have to get in the car and travel to go and get him. And also we have family dinners probably 3, 4, 5 times a week. It's just made it very convenient. Our kids are super busy in their careers and we're there to help out. You know, we're really lucky we were able to retire, and this just makes everything work for family.
Yeah, it's taken some time. I'll get back to your question about the transition and trying to live in an environment that is kind of the best of our previous homes. You know, we wanted a yard, we have a nice patio, we have our own space, we're close to our family. And my family's all over the country, my brothers and sister and all that. But, you know, this is our family, and I guess it's as good a situation as I could have imagined, transitioning from living on the West Coast all our life to here. And we've got a great neighborhood too. Not just our family right here, but the people behind us. Ileana designed that, the ADU for that family as well. And then as we've gotten to know the neighbors, it's been wonderful.
I just want to say real quick, our kids are leaving. Time for baby to go to bed. But we do have my favorite son-in-law who has made it possible for us to be here. You know, if he didn't like us, we'd be in trouble, or they would be. But
when they were looking for a home, he was insistent on living in DC, and he found the Hillcrest area, southeast DC, and that was really the only place for the price, you know, that they paid that ended up being perfect that we could build this home there. You know, there was a lot of other neighborhoods they looked at, but the Hillcrest area, right on the top of the hill, practically, it just turned out to be a wonderful area for us to be in.
I have another question, and not to go into financial particulars of this project, but there's a lot of, I see this as a studio a lot when my clients of the older group, 55 plus, the financial and estate planning of the housing options is a reality. They don't want to move, whatever. It's very important for them to be more conservative about the money. So do you want to share a little bit of how planning to live in an ADU fit your larger estate planning, or your idea, or your other alternatives you may have had as housing from a financial perspective?
here you go, banker.
As a banker, I always thought I would figure all the variables and factors in money management and investing. But what I thought our retirement would be, turned out to be somewhat different. You know, we sold our home in California at a good time, although it went up even more after we left. But I found that in our situation, since we don't have a house payment, basically this ADU that we built on their property with cash eliminated a big part of our living expense, and that is a mortgage. And then the cost of like the property taxes have gone up somewhat, and the insurance, but that's really minimal compared to if we had to have a mortgage on what it costs to build this place. What's more important, what we found is more important, and it's worked out, you know, well for us, is that, you know, and you see this a lot, is your cash flow, your income versus your expenses. When you're getting ready to retire, you can have a lot of money in the bank, but if you take it out, you're going to pay taxes until, you know, eventually. But if you have an income stream and control your expenses, plan for retirement, it's comfortable. We're very comfortable. We get a chance to travel 2-3 times a year. We're not lacking anything, and it just worked out great.
I think the other thing to add is that this is also part of our children's future. So when we're no longer able to live there, they have the opportunity to use it as rental income if they need to, or whatever. It's already there, it's already established. They don't have to think about, you know, do I need to do this? So I think we've kind of secured
One
that
more
way.
question. Rodney brought this up, and I love the way the choice of words he had. When people talk about these additional dwelling units, there's a lot about fear about like different buildings coming into the neighborhood. And there's something that I always think about when people return to ADUs. There's a lot of fear about living in a different environment, facing the alley instead of the street, or being, you know, in an environment that you don't know. Knowing now that Maria's ADU is right behind you. By the way, just by total chance, their neighbor from across the alley is also my client. They're right there. So theirs is the white one and the gray one is another ADU I did. So I've never seen that before where ADUs are like across the street neighbors. It's extremely rare. But my question is, at this age, what is the sensation that ADUs provide for safety and security for you as an individual and a family?
I think overall, we feel very safe where we're at. We love our neighborhood. We have great neighbors. There's quite a community feel there. And we do now have fencing around. And it's also, we don't have to worry about having to look for another place to live. So that kind of security is really good.
Well, then going back to the safety and security, since this was taken, there is now a fence and a rolling gate along the whole side there. We added that. And then we also have hardwired cameras on 2 sides of the house. And the neighbor on one side of the alley has cameras, and another neighbor. Everybody looks out for each other. We just text each other if anything looks suspicious, and that's really part of that community. You know, finding a place you can live, that the neighbors are open to talk, and you can have fun together. And we do have a lot of fun with our neighbors, and it does give us that sense of safety and security that we just don't, you know, give it much thought anymore, because it's enclosed, it's community, and it's enclosed, and everybody knows everybody. And that's how we both grew up back in California, you know, getting to know the neighbors and looking out for each other, and just feeling like it's a community.
Q&A, yep. Yeah, there's time. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. Yep.
So I'm sure people have questions about this particular project or what we covered earlier when it comes to zoning and building codes. So go ahead and ask questions, and I hope we can answer them. Wow, lots of hands up. Go for it.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kathleen Nonheck, and I was curious about if you don't have a very big lot, is there a requirement as to how much space there is on the Barbican side between the actual main house and the U?
Yes, so there are different rules that apply to it's called lot coverage. Depending on your jurisdiction, the zoning website may have it, so you can look up your address. So you want to look up several data points. One of them is lot area coverage. That means how many structures you have in your building.
in your lot, and it's a proportion between the area of the lot and how many buildings you have that cover that portion. So I would say in the most urban environments, say townhouses in DC, they may have a lot area coverage allowable of 60%. More suburban areas of 40%, 30. Another point data is you want to look for. I can help you out later, look it up, because normally this information is readily available. DC has a very good website, Montgomery County as well, we can look it up together, is data points of the minimum distance between the main structure and the secondary. So sometimes what was my DC, depending on the zone you are, that's 25 feet. But these are not very hard numbers. And then the setbacks distances from side and rear, it depends if you're facing an alley or not. And there's some other conditions there, but that information, unless your site is very, very small, you shouldn't run into a lot of issues. Odd sites, I'm working on a triangle lot in DC, that's painful. If your lot is wider than it is deeper, that is very difficult because actually the rear of your lot is very close to your main building. So those are situations like, that's gonna be hard. But again, even if it's not allowed by right, most times if you implement an ADU that is not gonna ruin anyone's life and it's because of an oddity of your lot, the zoning board would say, okay, fine, go ahead, do it.
I was gonna add too, on our home, the distance between the wall facing the other house to the edge of their patio is 60 feet, which gives us nice space for the baby to run around with the dog and all that. And that was something that Ileana included in that design. And this picture is somewhat misleading because there's a parking pad there on the back side, room for 2 cars. I have a Highlander and my daughter and son will have a 94, and we can park 2 cars there and close the gate for that security thing now. So it's a big lot and it's worked out really well.
Ellie.
Who's there? Oh, wait.
We've got a question
Oh,
right here.
okay. Oh, yes.
Do you mind sharing some of the characteristics you used to get the approval for the increased footprint?
I asked nicely.
No. Logistically, was it
No,
just
no, no.
the zoning board or was it?
It was a zoning board. It was BZA, Board of Zoning Administration. We knew going in that we were going to ask for permission for this. We asked for 2 main exemptions. One of them is the oversized lot. DC by code allows by right 450 square feet. That, just to picture it, is a 1-bedroom more or less. If it's in 1 level, you can get about 1 bedroom, 450 square feet. Just to picture it is about a 2-car garage. That is what you can do by right, which is very small, but also it's like what most people want to afford actually. Not everybody wants to go this large. So that is what the code allows. The other exemption we went after is like we have a accessible sort of balcony roof deck off of the main bedroom, which is great. I love it. I mean, do you like it? Do you still like it? Okay. So accessory structures in DC and in most jurisdictions are not allowed to have accessible decks or roofs. They argue it's to preserve privacy on neighboring properties. Never mind that you can have a balcony and accessory roof in the main house, so whatever, but you're not allowed. So instead of fighting the big fight, I say, hey, can we do it? Because our accessible roof was on the interior part of our lot, the zoning board said, I don't have a problem with this, because also this lot is so large that you can see anything and the neighbors couldn't see in, so they say whatever. And I mean, Board of Zoning in any jurisdiction, when you have to ask for permission, it's a long process. I've done a lot of them. They've all passed, fortunately. What I can say is that you have to show the board of any jurisdiction that your case not only is good, but that you're not going to devalue anybody else's property. You're not going to take away access to natural light. You're not going to be invasive. You're not going to destroy vegetation. So you have to show that if they allow you to do that, everything's going to be fine. That's easier said than done. Some jurisdictions, I mean, they become quite belligerent, particularly some neighbors. We're very lucky here. The neighbor says, fine, we don't mind. No jurisdiction gives 100% power to the neighbors to stop a project. They're just one more opinion they listen to. However, if 20 neighbors show up opposing a project, they may have a louder voice, particularly if they make a good case on how that project will devalue their property. So if you're gonna go for a project that it's your perfect design, if you're gonna ask for permission to bend the rules, make sure you have a super strong case that's good not for you, only for you, but it's good for the people that live around you. That is my recommendation. To me, they're not hard at all, particularly in DC now, because I've done so many. But before I go in front of them, I already know if I have a good case or not. And I just don't like to justify bad designs, so don't ask me to do that. So anyway, okay.
We'll take 2 more questions, and then Eliana is leading one of the...
Yeah, I'll be there. And I have Legos to give away, so I don't know.
I was going to ask if you've had experience, or what experiences you've had dealing with existing non-conforming structures when you were trying to situate.
A lot. So his questions about existing non-conforming structures. For example, I've had one of my first ADUs was and I talk about it in the book, it was about a garage that somebody did to put a boat inside. It was huge. It was larger than 450 square feet. Even if the renovation, it was so tall that we actually split in half. We added a few rows of masonry and we got 2 stories. Board of Zoning says, your structure is too big for that lot. And we're like, dude, it's already there, like, leave us alone. That's not what I actually said, but that's when I put together my case, I put dude in brackets, that's not it. But anyways, when the Board of Zoning said that even the alterations we were proposing were code compliant, it was a matter of paperwork. It was like, they're not gonna make you take it down. Any alteration we're doing were actually a contribution to the alley, and they said, fine, pass. I think that was my first one. I was so nervous, and they were super nice. They were like, no, you're right. I mean, the building's already there. It's non-conforming. You're not worsening. It's non-conforming. Now, here's the thing. If you have a non-conforming structure and you plan to alter it, like add it to it or make any changes, make sure you don't make the problem you have worse. So say you're already exceeding your lot area coverage. Well, make sure you don't make a horizontal addition, just add on top so you don't make that problem worse. And you'll still have to go to Board of Zoning, right? That is my recommendation. But don't be afraid if what you have is not like by the book. It's not a big deal.
Last question.
When you're designing, do you have to take into consideration the existing building? Are you trying to match it at all, or because I didn't see the original?
Yeah, so I design for my clients. I don't design for me. So depending on the existing additions, what the client wants, how visible, how the 2 buildings will live together, I try to make sure that first it works for what the clients want. Some clients want contrast, and that's great. Some other clients want to blend in, like the blue one you saw. Actually, the main house and the accessory are painted the same way. The siding is the same, and it works. It depends how you want to relate to both buildings, how close they are, how they can help each other. It's a matter of, to me, it's like, what's the best we can do with the resources we have, with the yard we have, what the client likes. They feel comfortable. A lot of people feel very comfortable with a traditional pitch roof, wood siding, nothing crazy. Other people's like, I'm retiring, I want to go crazy now, because whatever, and we do crazy. But at this point, I think that it's your home, and I encourage you to do what you like, what you find comfortable, what you find familiar, and go to town with that. There's no judgment. You have like the architect permission to do whatever you like. I don't think there's any more time. Each of us will have a table so we can like talk more about this and other things.
Exactly, yeah. So, so this wraps up the presentation portion of the evening. So again, huge thanks to each of our speakers and to our audience for this thoughtful discussion. So it's now time for our breakout sessions. Heads up, we will wrap up at 8 p.m. tonight. But I want to take this moment to thank you all once again for your time and participation. We look forward to seeing the ways you will apply what you've learned today to help create more inclusive and adaptable housing options in your communities. I want to thank our speakers and facilitators for sharing their expertise. Your contributions made this program informative and inspiring. Lastly, I want to thank our incredible museum staff. Our programs would not be possible without their hard work and dedication. Thank you. And I'll get back on the mic at 8 p.m. to let us know it's time to wrap up. Thank you.